know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road, lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Yeah, this is my road, lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go. Way too long, we faced them storms. From night to dawn, I right my wrongs alone. In competition with warnings, ice galore. Now I'm running toward it, my lights unfinished, being a quitter. But little by little, they joking, telling some riddles. Now I'm in my section, ain't willing to give up. Though you getting knocked down, but you gotta get up. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, hey.
Good morning, everyone. You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH 103.5 FM, your community radio. And when I use the term community, this really is a worldwide, global endeavor, thanks to really Paul Bass's vision at WNHH 103.5 FM through the New Haven Independent. This show first started, the actual station started as a low power station, secured a license from the Federal Communications Commission for low power. At that point, that means we can just broadcast to the radio in the local New Haven area. But given the magic of technology, we are literally able to reach people throughout the globe. And literally, this show is going to talk about how clinical trials and research and scientific discoveries are reaching people throughout the globe. But these discoveries have to start somewhere. And we're really blessed this morning as the show overview to talk about the importance of clinical trials and clinical trial participation. As many of you may know, there are a number of medical schools throughout the world, but the Yale School of Medicine, let's be really frank, is one of the more stellar ones. And so today, I guess I wanted to mention that the Yale School of Medicine really, as we know, excels at scientific discovery and has a really strong, vibrant, sustained tradition of developing promising new treatments for many different illnesses. The spark, if you will, for these and other medical advances begins in the laboratory or just as in the idea of a doctor. But these discoveries would not have been possible without the thousands of volunteers who agreed to participate in clinical trials. Today's show will look at how our willingness, your willingness, everyone's willingness, we need everyone to participate in research and how it has turned years of path-breaking research into medicines and treatments that benefit each of us, every one of us, and not just occasionally, but every single day. If you think of whatever medicines you might have taken this morning, it's a result of clinical trials. My guests this morning are Brian Smith, co-director of the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, also chief lab medicine and deputy dean for clinical and translational research at the Office of the Dean School of Medicine, Dr. John Crystal, co-director, Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, chair of psychiatry, chief of psychiatry, Yale New Haven Hospital, director of the NIAAA Center for Translational Neuroscience of Alcoholism, and Tisha Johnson, deputy director and chief operating officer, Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, director of clinical research at Yale School of Medicine. We're joined also by Reverend Dr. Leroy O. Perry, pastor of St. Stephen's AME Zion Church and cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program, and Reverend Alvin Clayton, pastor of Walters Memorial AME Zion Church and cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program. I normally don't provide such an extensive introduction, but in this case, it's really important for our listeners to know the stellar qualifications and the commitment of people that are on the show this morning. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning. To all of our guests, let's, and I'll say guests and colleagues and friends and fellow abolitionists, thank you for joining us today. On our previous shows, we've had a chance to hear about the work that each of you have been doing at YCCI. But let's begin today with your telling our listeners and viewers about yourself. Let me just close that window. About yourself and anything else that might be personal and or professional that you would like them to know. Often people hear about titles and degrees and just think that people live through those categories. but all of us are human beings. So I think our listeners might be kind of interested in hearing a little bit about anything you want to share professionally and personally um, this morning. Who'd like to go first? I'll call on Dr. Crystal. It's my
Great.
caveat to do that.
Tom, thanks. It's wonderful to be back here because research and understanding it is such an important topic and so essential to helping us to have the medications and other kinds of treatments that we need to help people be healthy. So you thank you for also listing all of my various credentials. The work that I do is trying to understand basic mechanisms of brain function and to translate that into new treatments. And we've actually done that. There's a treatment that's available now for people at Yale New Haven Hospital called esketamine, which comes from work that we did at Yale and my colleagues and I. And this is the kind of work that's going on all the time, the kind of discovery that you're talking about. And I'd also highlight that the Department of Psychiatry, we provide treatment for mental health and addiction problems in a variety of different kinds of settings. Yale New Haven Hospital, also the Connecticut Mental Health Center, which is a part of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services for the state of Connecticut, and the VA Connecticut healthcare system, which is a part of the VA system nationally and provides care for veterans all over the state of Connecticut. So that's me.
Great, great. Dr. Smith.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. Well, I certainly agree with everything that John and you just said, and I think was a great introduction to clinical trials. I'll just share actually how I got interested in this, because it actually goes back to when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. And I had a cousin who had a very unusual disease called Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, which is a really devastating disease, both for him and for the family. And at the time, there was not a lot of treatment for it. And he was entered into a clinical trial. At that time, I was in New York City, and he was actually entered into a clinical trial at Rockefeller University. And that was a whole eye-opening experience for me. I was just a little tyke, obviously, at the time. But the team that took care of him was just wonderful in terms of being sympathetic and to his underlying disease, and not just to what they wanted to do and learn about from the research perspective. And I really think that's the importance that those who are involved in clinical trials, as all of the folks on this call are, really do take it both from the kind of technical point of view, if you will, but most importantly from the point of view of how this is going to help an individual as well as a family. He unfortunately did pass away after probably about 4 or 5 years, but that stayed with me. And I'll be honest, that's kind of how I ended up moving into medicine and did some various dramatic types of clinical trials in what's called bone marrow transplantation when I was younger, and kind of moved my way up and up through where I do more and more administration these days, which hopefully has the goal of at least bringing in other folks like my experience. I think it's wonderful when we can have programs, which we have fortunately been able to have over the last couple of years, helped a lot by actually Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, as well as Tisha and John, to bring in individuals from high school and college and all kind of early parts of growing up and deciding what you want to do in life, and introducing the concept of a clinical trial. And I think that's been wonderful, and we're bringing ahead the next generation or two through those programs. So
tremendous. Tisha?
Thank you. It's great to be back on the show with John and Brian, but also with Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, who I really think have changed the way that we think about clinical research at Yale over the past decade. I've spent most of my career helping to operationalize the kind of clinical research that John spoke about, but a little more than a decade ago, about 13 years ago, actually, to this month, we were looking at how to make sure that we were messaging about clinical research appropriately, and realize that the number of people of color who were participating in clinical research at Yale was far below where we wanted it to be. We were, along with the national average, around 2 or 4% of our participants were people who identified as a person of color at the time, but just not anywhere near where we wanted to be. And when we did some focus groups, and the individuals who participated in the focus group said, think about doing this differently through people who already have a trusted relationship with the community. I had met Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton before, but hadn't had a detailed conversation with them until we started talking about this mission of making sure our clinical research was diverse and people had the answers to questions so that they could consider it as an opportunity, as a part of how they receive care. And it really changed everything that we were doing, from not only the really exciting work of messaging to the broader community, which you've been a part of for the past few years, and thanking you for that, but also, as Brian said, really moving to the space of thinking about how young people get engaged in clinical research and know about these jobs. And it's just been so fulfilling and so exciting. And we're thrilled to be here talking to you about it again with our partners, Reverend Dr. Perry and Reverend Clayton.
Excellent, excellent. Reverend Perry. I'm sorry, I should say Reverend Dr. Leroy Perry. That will get his attention. I apologize.
Yeah, you could call me whatever. I'm glad again to be on the show. I think it is a marvelous vehicle for us to get the word out into so many areas of social media, and I think that's so important. And that was one of the innovative things that we as cultural ambassadors helped to initiate with this YCCI endeavor. I would also like to say that when we were here early in the early phases, it was Tisha Johnson, then now Tisha Johnson Harris, who really was the glue that pulled this whole thing together. We were skeptical, we were challenged, and she was able to somehow help us to see something that we did not see as religious leaders and community leaders. We did not have the data nor the statistics on the outcomes of minority people who were vastly affected by so many of these diseases. And so once we saw the disparity, she gave us a doorway by which we might address that disparity. And so that's how the YCCI Amy Zime part of this Cultural Ambassador Program got together. And I'm going to wait to tell you the rest, because I know Reverend Clayton is waiting in the hallway.
Excellent, excellent. Reverend Clayton?
Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
I'm happy to be here again this morning with you and our friends. I'll take a different approach this morning. The Cultural Ambassadors is a great program, and so many people have been helped by what we have been allowed to be a part of. The question was, say something about us personally, I guess. I'll go on the personal side. This is a great time of year for me. It's NBA playoff time. And I'm a huge basketball fan, especially a Boston Celtic fan. And once we get through with the preaching and the teaching and the sharing of clinical research with our congregation, our community, I can let my hair down and watch a good game and let people know that even though we're busy, even though we're trying to bring about change in so many ways, everybody needs an outlet.
Yes.
So one of my outlets is watching a good game like I saw yesterday afternoon.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I was captain of my high school basketball team, so I appreciate what you just mentioned.
All right.
Dr. Crystal and Dr. Smith and Tisha, talk to us a little bit about May. Every month there's this month, that month we're celebrating something, but May is Clinical Trials Awareness Month, and that's important, and it's celebrated to increase all of our understanding of clinical research. But tell us, it might seem redundant, but tell us how important clinical trials have been to the advancement in medicine, because I think people have just forgotten and just do not really remember that there's been some pioneering takes place before we go to the pharmacy. Dr. Crystal, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, I think, I think your point is really important, which is that years and years of research have gone into the testing of every medication before any of these medications are made available. And the testing starts at a very basic level. I apologize for noise in the background. The testing starts at a very basic level where the medications are tested in very simple systems, often in animals, before they're deemed safe and reasonable to be tested in people. And then in people are tested in what's called phase 1 research. And these are when just the very basic aspects of the safety of the medications are evaluated, and where it's determined whether or not the medications are safe enough to be reasonable to be tested as a treatment for people who are suffering with various kinds of illness. Then there's something called phase 2 of clinical development. And these phase 2 trials are the initial tests of whether the treatments work for one kind of medication. And then there's phase 3. And in phase 3, large-scale clinical trials are conducted. And you have to have several large-scale trials conducted of every specific medication in order to make sure that the medications are truly effective and that they're truly safe when used in the way that they'd be used in clinical practice. All this adds up to thousands and thousands of patients participating in the evaluation of new clinical medication, and years of testing before each and every medication that we have becomes available for treatment. So you can see that this is an enormous enterprise that involves a collaboration, and it's really a collaboration between people who are interested in testing the drug and the people who might stand potentially to benefit from the new drug, because they're giving the people who are coming and participating in the clinical trials are full-fledged partners in the discovery of whether these medications are going to work. And without them, there is no treatment. There is no new treatment possible without this special kind of collaboration.
Tremendous. Dr. Smith.
So I think John and you as well in your introduction have really defined this very well. I think it is true that nothing that we use today in terms of whether it's medication, whether it's various types of diagnostic testing, really that we use effectively as what we now think of as routine clinical care, all had to come through clinical trials. And without clinical trials, we would still be, if we stopped clinical trials in 1950, we would still be treating everybody the same as we did in 1950, and we wouldn't have, vaccines for everything from polio through COVID and many other things. So it's obviously critical to how we move things forward.
Fascinating. Tisha?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I just wanted to expand on is the number of years it takes to develop a therapeutic. I think, clinical trials used to be a word that maybe was more mysterious to people in the community. And I think COVID might have changed that. And one of the things that I think people often are concerned about is how quickly COVID vaccines were developed. And although it does take years and years to develop something, the science behind the vaccines really did take decades to develop. And what was accelerated during COVID was the clinical trials process. People were working around the clock to get us those therapies. But when you think about something like COVID, and John mentioned the number of people who participated in clinical trials, it's actually astonishing just to think about, as an example, the Pfizer clinical trial. More than 43,000 individuals participated in those clinical trials. And so when you think about how medicines come to be, it really does take all of us working together, not just the scientists, but those volunteers. And we have two of them on the call today. Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton stepped up to actually participate as clinical trials participants in that study, really to bring things to market. And I think that that's one of the really important things that the ambassadors help us to message is the only way we're really going to understand the diseases that are disproportionately impacting our populations, people of color, is to do the clinical trials, to do the hard work, to understand the diseases, not just the basic side of the diseases that John mentioned, but to take it through each step of the way and to have enough participation in those trials so we understand if there are differences in the effectiveness or differences in the expected effects, the side effects, as some people say, but they really become expected effects because if we have enough people participate, we'll understand that these might be things that might happen as a result of taking that therapeutic. And so these are really important as these therapies are evaluated by the FDA. And that's why this partnership has been so special, because the cultural ambassadors help us make sure all of our research is not only relevant to the community and message to the community in the right way, but it's delivered through trusted messengers who have taken so much of their time over the past 12 years to be educated and to help us make sure that the community understands the importance of clinical research and how medicines get brought to market. Excellent. And to medicine cabinets.
Indeed. Excuse me. Let me take a little bit of a deep dive, and because folks are sometimes confused, Dr. Smith and Dr. Crystal, about when they hear the words clinical trials and/or clinical research. Are there distinctions between clinical trials and clinical research? Can you tell us a little bit about what that distinction might be?
So I would say clinical research is the entire enterprise to learn about illnesses that people have, and to learn about treatments, to learn about prevention, to learn about social factors that are influencing illness, learn about the entire enterprise of treatment. So clinical research is an extremely broad category. And there's a subset of clinical research that are the clinical trials, where we are trying to study an intervention. Now, an intervention could be something that prevents the onset of an illness, like a vaccine. It could be something that relieves an illness, like a medication treatment. Clinical trials, though, involve some kind of intervention, and that's a subset of the broader class of clinical research.
Dr. Smith?
The other thing I would add to what John nicely summarized is that if you think about it, just learning enough about the disease to be able to get to the point where one can develop a therapeutic agent requires a lot of work, sometimes on, for example, blood samples from individuals who have that disease. And that is in the realm of clinical research. It's not the same thing we usually think of as a therapeutic clinical trial. And fortunately, there are also thousands of people who are willing to say, you can take an extra, couple teaspoons of my blood when you need to draw my blood for other things that you just need for my care, and use that to analyze in the laboratory, see if one can figure out new things about the science behind the disease and different ways that we might be able to approach it. And there's also, to be honest, there's also the thousands of wonderful people who don't have a particular disease, but can represent what we call controls, individuals that don't have the disorder. So you can compare what somebody, say, who has diabetes looks like in certain aspects of their blood compared to somebody who doesn't have diabetes. And that's equally equally important to enter into and to get us to where we are today.
Just as you were talking, Dr. Smith and Dr. Crystal, my mind went to my good, my good friend Mark Brevard, who's involved with organ donation, and just again that's a part of clinical research, clinical trial for people to donate their organs. Just so there's so many ways for folks to participate. But Tisha, you kind of referenced the collaboration, the partnership, the marriage with YCCI and the cultural ambassadors. I wondered, Tisha and Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, since this is Clinical Trials Awareness Month, which obviously recognizes the research that's possible through the doctors that engage in scientific discovery, but also the thousands of volunteers that we've alluded to who agree to participate in clinical trials. Tell us a little bit about the Help Us Discover campaign. I've devoted most of my life to marketing, PR, communications, and wordsmithing, and I love that phrase, Help Us Discover campaign. So tell us about this and what you have called the Help Us Discover heroes, that the heroes and the sheroes. I love that as well. Tisha, would you like to start?
Sure. So we, when we started, I think I mentioned the focus groups earlier that led us to form the Cultural Ambassadors Program. We were trying to figure out a way, we have hundreds, if not thousands of active clinical trials at Yale every year. And some are in the Department of Psychiatry, which John oversees. Some are in the Department of Lab Medicine, which Brian oversees. Some are in our Cancer Center or Diabetes Center. And really trying to come up with, and they all have their own special cute name, that's intended to make them more marketable when they talk about clinical research. But it was hard to talk about everything and to talk about this, sort of broad sense of what is clinical trials and get at that message. And so we actually did market testing, kind of like, back in the day, there were all of these tests, Coke versus Pepsi, and what do people prefer? So we did our own version of that, the clinical trial slogans. And as we were testing that, what happened in the focus groups, the individuals who had agreed to be a part of the focus groups, no matter how nice the slogan was, what we found were all of the individuals who identified as a minority, regardless of education level, regardless of income level, regardless of age, they said, I like the slogan, we'd settled on Help Us Discover, but I would never participate in a clinical trial. And, there were so many reasons. It wasn't just the sort of past mistrust and not understanding that there had been regulatory changes to protect individuals, but even just understanding how to get access to a clinical trial or what the information was so they could validly assess what the personal risks to them were versus the potential benefit to society. So in that focus groups, we asked when we said to a group of minorities who had agreed to participate and said, how can we change this as Yale School of Medicine? How can we do a better job? And the participants said to us, the best way to get to us especially the Black community would be through the churches. They said it won't be perfect. Not everyone goes to church, but everyone trusts that the ministers of our community has our best interests at heart. And so if you can convince them to trust you, and we trust them, then maybe you'll have a shot. We don't think it's, we think it's going to be hard, but that's your only shot at this. And that's when I had the conversation with Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton. And maybe I'll let one of them take it from there.
Great. Reverend Perry?
Yes, thank you. I think that historically, in our culture, the ministers have always, even from the antebellum South, were the trusted messengers in our community. So it's no surprise that even today that still holds true. I would say that what Tisha and YCCI and the Cultural Ambassador Program was able to do is phenomenal. Here, prior to COVID, you have an organization that's out recruiting minorities to be a part of of research or clinical trials. And if COVID has taught us nothing else, it's that community that needs to be involved, educated, and to participate in clinical trials and clinical studies. But there has not been that outreach from NIH, FDA, Yale School of Medicine. It wasn't there. And it's not in our cultural DNA to want to go and volunteer or to look at the agencies of healthcare, because we don't believe that they're really there for us. Only in emergencies do we really look for them. So what we were able to do was we were able to change the number of individuals who wanted to participate in clinical trials. And that was awesome. And that she said, Reverend Clayton and myself also participated.
Yes.
We also tried to develop, getting young people involved in what we do and give them the same training so that we could outreach to that population. We looked for the newsletters, and we looked for every outlet that we could find to bring this kind of awareness. And this has not been done. And so people want to replicate what they see us doing here because they know it is impactful and it has broad outreach, but more than that, it has integrity. I met with the dean of Hood Theological Seminary, Virgil Lattimore, on Thursday. I spent 2.5 hours talking to him about the YCCI program. I took him our anniversary journal. I told him how ministers who leave divinity school never really think about clinical research or clinical trials, and how important it is in our communities, particularly because we are a minority, disadvantaged community. Equity is not always in front of us in this battle for health. And I said it would be so important if we could train seminarians to have one eye on this, while they have one eye on the Bible, they have one eye on the science. And we can put faith and science together. Now, Tisha didn't reprimand me, but she said, why don't you go to the school that you love, Yale? And I said to her, there are more ministers who are practicing, who are coming out of Black seminaries like ITC and Hood Theological Seminary, and one in Atlanta, Morehouse. It'd be important for us to start there, to at least address them in terms of equity, because that, I believe, is going to make a significant difference as we go forward. See, Tisha, I got my plug in.
You got it in. Good work. Reverend Clayton?
It appears to me that Tisha and Dr. Perry have took a blanket and covered this topic so clearly. But I will add one point. I heard Dr. Perry mention that the numbers have changed. I mean, the numbers have changed because the thought process has changed because of the efforts of people like Tisha and Dr. Crystal and Dr. Smith and the cultural ambassadors at large. Nowadays, people search for us and more so than we are trying to get them to become a part of a clinical trial. They're looking to us to help them find the trial. So yes. I think that's the biggest change for now.
Indeed.
Let me say one more thing, Tom.
Sure, absolutely, please.
The hero story that you mentioned earlier and that Tisha had mentioned. Tisha had this hero story even before we started almost. She said, these are people who can tell their story. So we piggybacked on that because it is so important. It makes it so human and so personal when a person can tell their health story to others. And that's how we grow. That's how we learn. So one of the things that we're doing with your show is that we're having individuals come on to tell their story. And so I know we have in June, we have Bishop Monroe who's coming. And that's going to be very impactful for men who've had prostate cancer and who are weary and may be ill-informed about it and about its outcomes and its possibilities. To hear someone talk about their journey is going to be so impactful. And then we also have the autism that's coming up, where we have a mother who had this fight with the school system and with the challenges. And she's going to tell her story. And she is awesome, Tisha. You've got to watch this show. She is awesome. She's a tough lady. And then we're going to have their sons come on, because one of their sons is now taking courses at Yale through a Yale online course. And if he passes the course, he can go on and take another course. The other young man has also written a book. So can you imagine how many people, how many moms are out there and dads are out there who are struggling with this issue? And when they see the show and hear these individuals, how much more impactful that's going to be. So
excellent.
That's what we're working at.
Excellent. Dr. Please.
So a lot of this discussion has been about how through Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, outreach to the community has changed. But what they haven't said, talked about, is how we have changed as a result of our communication, and that's really really important to understand that the Yale School of Medicine isn't the same Yale School of Medicine that it was 20 years ago, and through partnerships. For me, the cultural ambassadors have been very important. We've learned a lot about how to think about research better, how to conduct research better, how to communicate about research better, and in ways that are more meaningful for our surrounding community and more helpful. And so it's been a two-way learning process. And I can tell you that there are many of our faculty have been sent to the woodshed by Reverend Clayton and Reverend Perry about how to do their research and to communicate about their research in better and more meaningful ways. And they come out of it much better doctors and researchers. So we are learning from each other, and this is a really important partnership that's changing us as it is creating new opportunities for people to get involved research, particularly people who may not have felt connected to it in the past.
Really, thanks for sharing that. We have about 15 minutes, so if we skip around a little bit or don't cover some of the main points that we want to share, please kind of jump in. Dr. Gerstle, just as you were chatting, and it seems to me that you've said publicly, and I really want to salute you, that diversity and this kind of tag teams of what I think you just mentioned, diversity in clinical trials is a public health and social justice issue. I mean, that's just so profound to hear you say that. And then I just wonder if you want to explain a little bit more with that, how that resonates with you.
Sure. It's really, we want to be, as a healthcare enterprise nationally, giving people the treatment that they need. And in order to do that, we need to know how to best treat people. If only people from a certain group are participating in clinical trials, then when it gets time to treatment, that group has an advantage. They get the care that they need, and everything that we've learned helps just that group. That's not equity. That's not fairness. That's not justice. And in order for our healthcare community to be effective, we need to have the knowledge to give everybody the treatments that we need, and we have to do better at that. And that's one of the reasons why this is so important. So I really believe that quote, and I think that the path to get there is through programs like the cultural ambassadors that help get the word out about how important clinical trials are.
Excellent. Tisha, jump in a little bit, if you would, about how folks can participate. And I'll try to repeat this at the end of the show as well. We have about 15 more minutes. But how can folks participate in trials and/or find out more information, or share with folks, or just kind of do the Mary Appleseed thing and kind of spreading this clinical trial gospel?
Well, one way, obviously, we've already spoken about it. It's talk to your local cultural ambassador. Is a really important way to get the word out. But we have a website, so it's you can visit our Help Us Discover website. If you're on our practice website, you can just search clinical trials and the site will come up. We also have, if you're a patient, you can just go into My Chart and there's a research tab and you can see the available clinical trials there. You can even build a profile and say, if a future trial comes up with, type 2 diabetes, I want to be contacted and here's my information. We have a 800 number, 877 978-8343, or you can email us at helpusdiscover@yale.edu. So we try to get as many ways as possible for you to connect and hear about clinical trials. And you can also just ask your physician during your clinical visit if you have an interest in clinical trials as well. Don't forget about that. That's a primary way of really connecting and understanding what might be right for you.
Excellent. I guess, Tisha, Reverend Clayton, and Reverend Perry, we talked a little bit about the history and the her story of the ambassador program, but in our preliminary discussions prior to the show, the name Bob Sherwin came up. Any of the three of you want to kind of discuss and mention him? Because I'm into, I guess, love to give people their props and just from a historical standpoint, just to recognize. So who was Bob Sherman and how did his name kind of enter our discussion?
Bob was the the founding director of the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, and Bob spent almost 50 years of his life at Yale doing clinical research. He and his colleagues at Yale were pivotal in the development of the insulin pump to treat diabetes. And so Bob was very passionate about clinical research. He's very passionate about mentoring young people. And he was very passionate about changing the dynamic between our clinical research programs and the community. So when we met 12 years ago, Bob was at the table with Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton and all of the community leaders to talk about what we needed to do, and importantly committed to them that we were willing to make all of the changes that John described earlier. And he passed the torch when he decided to retire to Brian and John to continue this incredible work. But I'll let any of the other guests comment here as well.
Reverend Clayton or Reverend Perry?
Well, I remember him as a very passionate participant in our efforts. He always had a smile, and he was always open to new ideas and new possibilities for the growth of the program. He never shrunk his duties in any way. And I believe he truly believed that we could make a difference. And when you have people behind you who believe in the program, like our doctors here, it does make a difference. You know, if you have someone who's just there, but they're not passionate about it, then your results are going to be different. Tisha, did he help to develop the artificial pancreas?
Bob's work was, John talked about at the beginning of the show, his work in ketamine and how some of his early work led to this FDA approval of S-ketamine. The foundational work that Bob did in 1979 with the insulin pump was a precursor to what we term as the artificial pancreas or the closed loop system. But that's the really wonderful thing, I think, about clinical research is generations and generations of scientists build on and continue to improve. And that's how we get these incredible treatments that decades later had their origins in someone else's lab from earlier and mentored and over the scientific course. And so that's really how Bob was foundational in that work. It was actually his mentees that continued the science year over year and led to some of the seminal studies in that space. I know Brian or John, if you want to come in here, since obviously you knew Bob for decades as well.
I think I would just say it, and I think everybody has found Bob well. I would also say that he's also one of the most patient people in the world. And I think that's critical, both in terms of getting everybody together and as you were just saying a minute ago, Tisha, I think being patient enough to realize that something you do today may not get into clinical practice for 15 years or 20 years. It may be modified. There may be lots of great ideas that come not just from from other doctors and scientists, but frankly from the patients themselves and the subjects themselves and the research that say, how about if you did it this way? And I think what is one of the great things about Bob is just that ability to have the patience and to listen to everybody.
Excellent. We have about 7 more minutes, so again, just to jump in if any stream of consciousness thoughts come or just thoughts. But I wanted to ask Dr. Crystal and Dr. Smith that someone might be wondering, from a participation standpoint, could they participate even if they're not sick or even if they don't have a particular diagnosis? And we hear this term like healthy volunteer trials, but how does that differ from specific disease trials?
Well, Dr. Smith already alluded to this a little bit, but when we do our biological testing of the body or various fluids or brain imaging scans or whatever, when we study a patient group, we can't tell whether the results are abnormal unless we have healthy results to compare them to. And so much research that it ultimately ends up informing patients comes from what we learned from studying healthy people. There are numerous opportunities for people to participate. And one of the great things about this is that, so many of us have family members or relatives or friends who are struggling with one kind of medical problem or another kind of medical problem. And you wonder, well, what could I do to help that person who I really care about ultimately get better? And participating in these kinds of research studies as a healthy person is a way to help generate the knowledge that ultimately leads to new treatments and maybe even cures. So it's a really important path for healthy people to participate.
And let me just say, I think that bringing medicine to where people are, and you alluded to it, John, when you said that the school is changing or has changed and is evolving even now. And I think part of that evolutionary process has to deal with how we partner and who we partner with in order to get the disparity taken care of and to get the message out. And so I just want to just put a plug in because Tisha did allow for us to have at least when the pandemic broke out and our seniors were marginalized even more because they didn't know how to use the web or the internet highway. She went out and got some iPads or some tablets for some seniors 80 and 90 years old and brought some Yale people in to help them use it so that they could learn how to do telemedicine, how they could learn how to do Zoom so they could go to church, who learned how to email so that they could let their family members know that they were well and taken care of. And though that's the kind of foresight and insight and development, I think it's going to really make a difference in terms of who's doing medicine and how they do it. The people who can reach people where they are the people who are going to be making the changes and making the difference in the science. And I think that is so important. And I just want to plug that in because Yale is already taking the forefront here.
Excellent. We've got about 3 more minutes. I guess when I ask my last question, but we're still in the midst of COVID, and I wonder, Dr. Crystal and Dr. Smith and Tisha, with COVID and the variants, depending on who you talk to, at least on the rise or still with us, what is YCI doing in terms of addressing COVID now and in the future? Because this show is just, it's some of a historical look, but it's also a prospective look. And And YCCI is really their challenges and perhaps never been greater. So to talk to us a little bit about COVID and how the YCCI is addressing the various variants. Dr. Crystal?
Well, I'm going to defer to Dr. Smith on this one because he understands all the COVID tests and all the variants. We've been helping people deal with the stress of COVID, but Dr. Smith's actually dealing with COVID itself.
Please, Dr. Smith.
Not minimize at all what Dr. Crystal's crew is doing, because frankly, both for the providers, for the nurses and the doctors and everybody on the healthcare front, it's obviously usually stressful in addition to the families as well as the patients themselves. And they've been doing some marvelous work that's research as well as direct intervention for all of those folks. And I think that's actually been not a unique part of what people have been doing around the country, but certainly a very important part that we've done here. You know, I think you're absolutely right, Tom. I think this is something that likely is going to be with us for a while. This isn't going to just disappear entirely. It is going to probably evolve towards something more like flu, where we have to be on our toes all the time and changing vaccines and so forth. So YCCI has really made the permanent commitment to looking at COVID and similar diseases. We've actually set up a unit where people who are positive for COVID can come in. Obviously, they can't come into the same places that those of us who are negative at any time will be seen, and have clinical trials that really just involve that group of patients in a safe and supportive place for them to be able to move forward. The vaccine trials are ongoing and critical. Those are going to evolve over time, and I think we're going to continue to participate in all of that as well. And I'll just make one more plug actually for Reverend Dr. Perry and Reverend Clayton, because I think part of what we see with COVID, and that we're doing it with all clinical research as we go forward, is getting younger and younger people involved and recognizing this. And they've really initiated, along with Tisha and the crew, the Young Ambassadors Program. I think you were alluding to that earlier, Reverend Perry, which I think is really a terrific thing. And I think that's going to be critical as we face up to this and other challenges.
You guys know the drill. Harry's going to play the music in about 90 seconds. So who wants to jump in? Because again, these 55 minutes go so quickly. And really thank all of you for your participation and your conscientiousness.
I want to ask Tisha, is there going to be a third, an added booster? Because my seniors are asking me every day, we've got boosted. Should we be looking for another booster real soon? I don't know the answer.
I'm going to let Brian take that one also.
Where it is right now is that the additional booster does boost. It appears to work, give you a boost for only about 4 to 6 weeks or so, additional over what you already have. So it's, I think what some of us are sort of waiting for is to potentially look at what might be the next variation of a booster, so that it would be able to deal with, as Mr. Ficklin was saying a moment ago, with the new variants that are coming along. So there are, and it's again, ask your own provider, ask your own doctor with respect to this. There are some individuals who will benefit clearly from getting that, but I think generally out there, it's see where things are with your particular medical situation, because the alternative is waiting a little bit.
Everybody, thank you so much. Sorry we have to end, but we just keep on continuing. Stay focused. Thank you for all the guests. Thank you for listening to WNHH 103.5 FM, your community radio station.
Let's camera action, I'm ready to go. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, hey. Yeah, this is my road. Lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go. Way too long, we faced them storms. Now you gon' face the dawn you waited for.